Presbytery of Philadelphia, we've been blessed with a rich heritage of pastoral leadership that spans more than 300 years. As descendants, as recipients, and as stewards of that leadership, we're creating a video library entitled Legacies in Leadership. It's our hope to be able to lift up the witness of leaders who've been pivotal in embodying the gospel of Jesus Christ in the greater Philadelphia area and beyond. We want to share their stories, know their stories, learn of their tenacity and the depth of their faith and witness. Many of these leaders will be individuals whose witness has been largely embodied on the margins and footnotes of our larger history. Our hope is to move those stories onto the main pages of our journey so that we might be both informed and inspired to press on at this time in history. It's clear that we stand on the shoulders of saints whose ministry touched the lives of so many. And today we want to claim their story as part of our own stories. Our initial series will focus on African American leaders who have been a bold and transformational presence in our midst. It's our hope that you will consider taking the time to listen, taking the time to hear the story of us as it has evolved over the decades. And may God continue to bless us with a courage, a faithfulness, and conviction to learn from our past as we seek to live into the hope of our tomorrow.
So thank you for doing this. For everyone who may be watching, Reverend Kevin Porter, State Clerk of the Presbytery of Philadelphia. Brenton Thompson.
I'm Brenton Thompson, the Director of Congregational Resourcing here at the Presbytery of Philadelphia.
And this is, as Reverend Ruth Santana Grace likes to speak of you, the indefatigable. I think she called it indefatigable. In other words, untiring.
Yeah.
Reverend Dr.
Ethelyn Taylor.
Ethelyn Taylor. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. We just wanted to have a time to talk to you as a living legend of our presbytery. Just learn a little bit more about your life, your sense of ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So just starting off at the beginning, can you tell us a little bit about your childhood?
Oh, wow. Had a wonderful childhood. There were 4 girls and 1 boy. If there's one thing that my parents left us with, it was a legacy of love. Hmm. My father was a policeman, and so he was always, in and out. My mother never worked. She was a homemaker. She was a disciplinarian, if she could catch us, But the one thing that I remembered, Mama always tried to make it so that we would have dinner when Daddy was home. Mm-hmm. And he was the one that was really funny in the family, And one of the ways that we learned how to read and do comprehension was at the dinner table after dinner. He would read Mutt and Jeff to us and other comics, and we would have to guess the punchline, And he was always a joke. So he was always one, if my mother said, you had to take care of Ethelyn because she was sassy. And he said, oh, she's still a child kind of thing. He always let us off the hook kind of thing. But my family life growing up was wonderful. And we had aunts and uncles on both sides who were like parents to us, So we were a tight-knit family, but a loving family. And I can say that, with knowing that that's how I grew up.
Was that here in Philadelphia?
Born and raised in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And where were you in the order?
The oldest.
All right.
And I always tell my siblings the smartest, But yeah, I was always the oldest, and I had a lot of responsibility. Even though my mother never worked, then you could go out and pay your bills kind of thing. And she would always call me in the kitchen with a list. And this is what I want you to do, to make sure the others did, And my mother would be halfway down the street when they all tried to say, oh, you think because you're the oldest, you're our mother. Well, you're not. But even today, my siblings come and ask me for directions or advice. My mother gave, so that all of us had piano lessons, but I was the only one that really stuck with it. And I remember playing the organ at Reeve, and my brother was a member there. And every now and then I would play something that would really touch him. And he said, oh, I wish my mother, our mother would just have scolded me to continue with the music, But I've always loved music, and I ended up at the conservatory for 2 years studying music. And that's another long story because my father I knew that I couldn't, we grew up during the Depression, I did anyway. And the only college that I applied to, I went to Girls High. The only college I applied to was Temple University, because then I figured, I wouldn't dare ask them, if I could go away to school. And I remember when I got my acceptance letter from Temple, I waved it in my father's hand, all excited, and he just looked at me and he said, and what are you going to use for money? And I said, well, you have money. But my father always, when we would ask him for money, he would always say, I'm giving you this is my last dollar. But we knew that it wasn't, So from that, I just figured he had money. And I'll never forget, my father put down 3 tens, I still see them, and a $5 bill on the table. And he says, if you can go to college on this, be my guest.
Wow.
But he made a mistake. He said, and anyway, women are supposed to get married and have children. I remember my father from the old school, And I remember, the first time I ever talked back to my father, I said to my mother, I'm going to show my father that women can do more than just get married and have children. And of course, my mother would say, Ulysses was his name. We told our kids that they could be anything they wanted to be. And that was a journey. And I knew then, but not fully understanding it, that I was a gifted teacher. Because when everybody was out riding their little tricycles or roller skating down the street, I was upstairs playing house with my dolls on my mother's dresser, But I knew that I was headed to be a teacher, and I didn't allow anyone to take that away from me, But I had a wonderful childhood, and all of our aunts were like mothers, uncles were like fathers, Sundays we went to church. My mother and father were brought up in were always Methodist, African Methodist Episcopal. And we always went to Sunday school, and we would meet our friends, it's during Sunday school and afterwards. But we always knew at 11 o'clock where to find Mama and Daddy, They never pushed us to go to church, like you had to go, or we stayed in church 3 or 4 times a week. But I put it to the test one day. I said, I don't feel like going to church this morning. And my mother said, that's okay. When you come home from Sunday school, take off your clothes, and the mop and the pan will be there for you to scrub the kitchen. You know the choice I made. But there's nothing in my childhood that I can think of that were trying times. I was always, my father and I were especially close. He would like to, well, I guess you would call it not arguing, but he would like to tease me all the time, and I had a temper. You wouldn't believe it, but I did. And, but I was always afraid that something would happen to him as a policeman. And when he worked from 4 to 12, I would never go to sleep until I would hear that key in the door. And one night, a policeman came to the door and told us that Daddy had been hit by a car directing traffic at Broad in Columbia. I thought, part of me, just, but I was always protective of him on that end, But I can't say much of anything about my parents that because of who I am today, they were a great part of that. And I also would say my sisters and brothers, as kids, we would have our little arguments and everything, but we knew that we had to make up. It wasn't this pouting and not speaking, to family. And that's why my sisters and my brother and I are so close today, you know. And we have raised our children with the permission that if any of our children got out of line, you know, we became their parents, you know. And that's how we've raised our grandchildren, you know. So it's the joy, the journey of the joy has been just marvelous. And you know, I'm writing a book now.
Oh, really?
It's called The Joy of an Incredible Journey. And it has been. But I've had a good family, you know, good family life, you know. And speaking about my father, when I went to the conservatory for 2 years, then I met the love of my life from Lincoln University. At the time that I went to Lincoln, there were only 3 women on campus. And it was an all-male school, as you all know. I can't remember, Dr. Miller, he was a Greek professor. His wife was at Lincoln in college. Grace Frankowski's wife, I can't think of her name right now, but she was Dr. Bonds, Horace Mann Bonds' secretary, and myself. And I remember the first day I went to class, and I went on a scholarship, by the way. The first day I went to class, it was in a big gym area, and I came in the back door, you know, intimidated, so I thought. And when the class was over, and the guys used to come to class, you know, with their pajama tops on, you know, kind of thing. And he said to the guys, he says, "Gentlemen, this will be the last day that you will come dressed like this to class." And one of the guys yelled out, "Why, Prof?" He said, "Don't you see that young lady sitting back there?" And these sea of faces just turned. And one guy yelled out, "Well, who asked her to come here anyway?"
Whoa.
So I ran across the campus crying. And that's when I learned how to become a rabble rouser. And a rabble, if you know anything about Lincoln University, you know. But I ended up working part-time for Dr. Bond. Julian Bond then was about 9 or 10 years old. And the fellows used to tease him, you know, and I would try to come to his aid. And one day I was going to class and heard this noise in this trash can. And I said, "I know that's not a human voice." And when I took the lid off the trash can, there was Julian Bond, where the guys, you know, had put him in the trash can, you know, just, you know, his father was the president of Lincoln University, you know, he would always say, "I'm going to tell my dad," you know, kind of thing. My years at Lincoln University was wonderful. My husband graduated he graduated in 54, but we left there in 53 because his mother had passed. And his dad was a Presbyterian pastor at the 15th Street Presbyterian Church. And very well known in the presbytery there. In fact, he became moderator one year, and that was a story. But I never believed in living with your parents. I believe you get married, you struggle on your own. But he kept begging us to come and live with him. You won't have to pay any rent, you won't have to do this or that. And I knew he was, because he always had somebody living with him. So I gave in, you know, because I believed, remember I'm from the old school too, that the husbands, you know, they made the decision. Not that we went along with it. And Herb was always the kind of person that he talked to me about things, you know. Plus, then at that time, you were getting a bachelor of theology, and then you had to get a master's. You know, now you don't, it's just that one. And so he enrolled at Howard University Theology School and got a master's. And I went to Howard University for a year in the School of Music, straight A's, because I knew music, and that was the other thing, music was one of my gifts. And but I, on my own, dropped out of Howard because then he was going in school and he had this part-time cab, you know, and it was an independent kind of thing, and you know, he wasn't always lucky about getting jobs. So I saw a sign one day in the school that they needed someone in the medical school as a secretary, medical secretary. So I went, and the worst thing you can tell me is no, and I'll find another way to go. And I was interviewed by Dr. Johnson, who was a cardiologist, and he wanted to know what skills I had to be applying for this job. And I said, well, I know how to type, and I took typing lessons at Benjamin Franklin, back then. And he says, but what kind of medical skills do you have? And I said, I can read and I can write, And so the conversation lasted about 45 minutes, and he said to me, well, I think you have a lot of nerve coming in here asking for this kind of job, and all you can do, and I said I could fire, asking for a job. And I said to him, okay, I'll just tell my brother-in-law you were not nice to me. And he said, who is your brother-in-law? And my brother-in-law was a physician, and everybody knew Dr. Harry Taylor. And then he kind of softened it. Within 3 weeks, I became his secretary, in the office with another secretary. And I think doctors, maybe I shouldn't say this, but doctors have the worst handwriting. And I would wait, and I would have to type up case studies. And I'd see a medical student coming along, and I'd grab him, and ask, what this word was, because I knew just one letter could change, the whole thing, When he was head of the department, but he actually took an office down in the basement where he did a lot of work. And he took me as his secretary. So I stayed there for 6.5 years. And then my husband got a call to Grand Rapids, Michigan, in the Dutch Reformed Church. And that was, another good 6.5 years experience there. There was a congregation that was moving out, and of course, and it was a white congregation, but some of them stayed, about a half a dozen of them stayed, because they wanted to start this mission church, and that's why he was called there. And I finished at Calvin College, and I was the only African American in a class of almost 300. My father was so proud of me, and I knew it. And I remember when we came back to Philadelphia in '65, and I remembered, and I started teaching the next year at Dunlap School that I, went to. And my father came home one day and he said, all the kids around the block know me. And I said, what do they call you? Well, they call me Miss Taylor's father. He said, but that's good enough for me. But I knew that he was proud of the achievements, that I had made, kind of thing. But in Grand Rapids, Michigan, I went to Calvin College, and I graduated with a BA in education, Bachelor of Education. And I immediately got a job and taught. I knew that was what I was going to be doing, And my father-in-law became sick. He had pancreatic cancer. And I would come home every day at 12 o'clock to make sure that he had his breakfast. And he wouldn't eat for his own son, And I remember the first time I came home, and I said, Pop, I understand you're not eating. And he says, no, I don't want that. I said, but you're going to eat for me. I said, because I'm using my lunch hour to come home, He said, daughter, I don't want anything to eat. He said, but for you, he said, I'd do anything. Mm-hmm. And that's how I learned to be a good Presbyterian, by the way. Drinking coffee, more coffee, and more coffee, And he really taught me a lot about who Presbyterian, because I was always raised in the AME church, And of course, when I married her, I became Presbyterian, and worked with the young people in the church. But we stayed there for 6.5 years, and he passed while we were there. And then we got the call from, I say we, from Reeve Presbyterian Church. And it was nice to be able to come back home. Got a job a block and a half away from where I lived, my old school where I taught, And the custodians would come up to me and says, we're closing the school down at 5 o'clock, and you spending the night here? That's how much I love teaching, And that's a whole new story with those kids, I would, and at that time, I would invite the kids to come to to church, to Sunday school, and they came. And I started the first summer day camp program at Reeves, after school program. And I even had the men to become involved. And we would take trips on the bus. You know, we never had a school bus. You know, we would go right on the trolley, you know, downtown. I just loved it there. And then after 15 years, the school was closing. I was transferred to Charles Drew School, where I stayed, you know, until I retired there after 25 years. You know, so it's been a marvelous journey.
One question, just listening. This one wasn't one that we had, but just listening to
okay.
one, that ability to be the only woman at Lincoln at the
Yes.
time. To what do you attribute your ability to walk into those situations with the ability to?
Well, I think, you know, our parents always told us that we could be anything that we wanted to be. So I was not easily intimidated, you know. I had, as I look back, I had an assurance with humility, but then, you know, it might not have been the humility then that, you know, because if I knew I could do something or I wanted to try something, I was not afraid to do it. There was not that fear built in any of us as kids growing up, you know. So, and you know, if I couldn't do it or if I got stuck, I just backed away and would go in another direction. It was never a thought that I couldn't do it. Even when I went to seminary, a situation which I never ever, now I see it all, believed that that's where I would be. In my 25th year of going into teaching, I'm sitting, I never worked during the summer. I always, you know, was involved in Reeves and, you know, or at some church working with kids. And I'm sitting on the porch and I'm reading, and it suddenly dawned on me that you're going to be retiring one day. What are you going to do for the rest of your life? And at that time, you could retire with 35 years of teaching experience with full pension. But then they lowered it to 30 years because they had an overabundance of teachers. So I said, well, this is my 25th year. Maybe I can stick it out to 30 years, you know. And I kept wondering, what can I do? That's all I know how to do is to teach. And I've received many awards for teaching, you know. And I remember looking up towards the sky, and I said out loud, Lord, whatever it is you want me to do for the rest of my life, I will be obedient to that calling. Just don't put me in a wheelchair or have something to happen to my hands. Because I was organist, you know. At that time, I taught a pen, you know, and that's another story. I've never had less than 2 jobs, never. And I kept wondering all summer long, what could God want me to do that He has not already gifted me with? And I just kept wrestling with this. And it's that 30-some years ago, it's just as clear to me today. As I tell people, God didn't call me on the telephone, nor did He blind me on the road to Damascus. But just in saying my prayer that particular night, the Spirit spoke to me loud and clear. I want you to continue that journey that I have gifted you with. But you must be theologically prepared. And I thought, Lord, I'm not going to any more. And I got up laughing. I said, undergraduate school with 2 children, graduate school with 4 children. I'm not going to any more school. I'm not doing any more reading. And I just went on and said to the Lord what I wasn't going to do. I finally made an appointment with the dean at the seminary, Eastern Seminary. And he said to me, and I knew what seminary was about. After he heard me, you know, tell my end of the story, he said, well, young lady, why haven't you been here before now? I said, the only reason I'm here now is because I don't want God to zap me, you know. And so he encouraged me then, because I was still teaching full-time, still teaching at Penn. And Well, I knew I could only take one class, from 6 to 9 or whatever. And I chose the Old Testament, and I thought it was just about learning the scriptures. And I was in for a rude awakening. But I did enough to pass. Then the next semester, I took a New Testament course. And then the third semester, would you believe it or not, I took Hebrew. Because I knew I had to take, the language. And how I learned a little bit of Hebrew that I knew I probably wouldn't take it for, final exam. I taught it to the kids in the class. And, you would have like maybe 10 or 12, 13, 14 sentences to translate either way. And I would go to class, and I was the only woman in the class, that night class. And I go to class, and of course, the professors would say, okay, put the work up on the board. And I'd run to the board and put my 3 or 4 sentences up. And then I'd come back and sit down, and there was always 2 or 3 that nobody, had up there. So I remember the professor saying to me, Miss Taylor, you go to the board and you do it and show these guys, I said, not me. I said, as hard as I've worked, let somebody else do that. But if he had come and looked at my paper, my book, and seen that I had only finished number 9, and not the rest of it, But so that, that's how I got to go to seminary. And of course, I could only take one course at a time until I went to near the end of my 25th year. In that March of that year, I went to my principal and I said, I'm not coming back in September. And he said, well, where are you going? I said, I have a higher calling than the one I have now. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'm not going to let you go. He said, because you're the best teacher that I have here. I said, that's not true. I said, you just need to get around and look at the different classrooms a little more, He said, and he was his father was a Baptist pastor, and I knew he was a Christian and taught Sunday school and whatnot. He said, I would never hold you back. He said, I'm only teasing you. He said, but I sure hate to lose you. And I never, ever looked back. Never. And in going to seminary, and I think you know the story of my boys. I lost one of them in a tragic accident. He was the only one of my 4 kids that didn't want to go to college right away. He was a young 17 when he graduated. And he kept saying to me, Mom, he said, would you send me to college to see if I like it? And I said, no. I said, money doesn't grow on trees. Plus now, I had the oldest one in school. My youngest daughter was just starting school, Mary Lou. And I said, no. I said, but what I told him that I would not tell a young person today to join the service. And I said, join the service. And I said, and you'll find out what it is you want to do. It ended up that he knew he wanted to be an oceanographer. He was in the Navy, and he was always away. I never knew where he was until he would come back and call, and he was stationed on an aircraft in Virginia. And he wrote me one day, and he said, that's when he told me I knew exactly what I want to do. He came home that June, and he wanted to buy a car, and he would bring the airplanes in, and help them to go out. And so that was extra money. Of course, you didn't have to, his food and everything was paid for, So I told him to save that money. I said, to send it home. I said, I don't want any of it. I said, save it. And so he saved up enough to buy a new car. And he would have all kinds of those sports pictures of cars on the coffee table. And only thing I said to him was, son, get what you need and not what you want. And I'd gone on a cruise and came back late one evening. And I saw this little Nissan, it was, with these temporary tags on it. I knew it was his. And the next morning, and my boys and I would take turns fixing breakfast. And he was fixing breakfast, and I knew he wanted to say something about that car. And finally, and he got a job within 2 weeks after getting out of the Navy. I said, son, is that your car out there? He said, yeah. He said, you like it? I said, I'm so proud of you. I said, you got what you needed and not what you wanted. And that was in July that he started working and got this car. He wanted me to co-sign for it. I said, I never will. I never did it with your dad. You have to work on your own. And coming from a church service one night, and we Presbyterians are not big on revivals. and coming from a church service one night. And the man that, the pastor that was there was one that was in school with us at Lincoln University. He and his girlfriend were driving home, had taken her girlfriend home, and they were crossing, going south on 57th Street, and the police was chasing a drug dealer at 95 miles an hour and hit him on impact. And I was up here doing a workshop for Summit Presbyterian Church, and we always had always said to, and that's something that our parents taught us, wherever you go, always tell somebody in the family where you're going. And I said to them, I'll be late coming home because I'm going to visit Aunt Doris, who was a friend of mine, because she had just come back from China. And they called me and told me that he was in the trauma unit, and I knew that wasn't good. He was gone when I got there. But you learn to. Part of me died then. I could hear a hymn, particularly the Navy hymn, and would just stop and just cry. But we established a scholarship fund in his memory at Reeve, and that's how we got some of the kids to, go to get some money to go through. And of course, my other son died of kidney failure. And I would visit him in the hospital, and that's when I just started up here at Oxford. And I would go down and spend some time with him. And then my mother was beginning to be aged and had dementia, slightly then. And I would make sure that she was okay. I've done some sermons sitting in that chair in the hospital. And I remember that Mary Lou had spent the night there at the hospital with him. And she came home. She says, "You got to go back down." She says, Michael is dying. And I called him on the phone, and I said to him, God comes first in my life, and you better not die without saying goodbye to me. And when I went I left Oxford, went to the hospital, and he said, "Mama, I'm just tired." He says, "I'm ready to meet Jesus." I went to the window. I said to him, "You want me to let go of your hand and put it in God's hand?" And that was the first time in a long time that I saw him smile. And he said, "Yes." And I thought I was going to bite my tongue off. I went to the window, and I came back and I said, "You have my permission to meet Jesus." And I remember one of the last things he said to me, "I'm going to be watching you when you take that Greek exam." He said, "I don't want no stuff out of you." But he lived, I think, for 2 or 3 weeks after that, and he passed while I was up here. But those were the 2 heartbreaking moments. I think many of you know that I had a wonderful marriage for 30 years, and things happen. Things happen. Those were the only 3 times in my life that I really questioned God. God, I've been a good wife, and I know it. Why are you letting this happen to me? What have I done? And I'm one that if I need to take the blame for something, I'm big enough to say, "I'm sorry, I messed up." But I knew I was a good wife. And I guess it just wasn't to be. And I questioned God about my boys, because I raised my children, my 4 children, like I was raised, with love, and we had that close knit family, with my 2 girls, but that's basically my life. Yeah. I went to the dean one day, and I said to her, "You send me some very bright students, but they don't have common sense." And she said, what do you mean? I said, when a child, comes in the classroom crying or is upset, I said, if they can't find the answer on page 37, they don't know what to do with that child. They need to learn how to love the whole child and not just part of that child. So she said to me, yeah, that might be true. She said, but I want you to develop a course on how we can get these students, involved more. And I developed a course. I have no idea where that curriculum is now. It's probably packed away somewhere. Everything you ever wanted to know about teaching, but was afraid to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that was a hit because it was common knowledge, common sense stuff, and my kids were like my children, in the classroom. They were my kids. Better not mess with them. Yeah.
It's taking that same spirit
Mm-hmm.
and given the number of folks that have been underneath you as pastors,
Mm-hmm.
what would you say as far as everything that preachers need to know but afraid to ask? What's your taking to your knee a word to preachers, pastors?
I think the one thing that I've told all of those, and by the way, I've mentored over 18 seminarians from all across the country. And the one that I raised up the name of is Aisha, because she did some work under me, is to be a caring person, to learn to listen. I think, and people do look to us as pastors for the answer. Mm-hmm. And that's not what we're there for. Because I have found in my journey in life that people really don't want the answer. They just want you to listen to them. But you've got, there's a difference between hearing someone and listening to someone, and to learn how to be just caring. And if I had to choose some words, caring, listening, and compassionate, because we're human too. But I've always known in my heart that God has called us with something special.
Mm-hmm.
And that special thing may be different for all of us, each one of us, And the other thing is the people that you minister to are not just those who are in the church, your parishioners.
Mm-hmm.
Your parishioners are your community. And I remember when they interviewed me in Oxford, and I tell this story. I think they had 2 other interviews that night. And the story goes that here comes this little lady with this white hair, bouncing in as if it was 8:30 in the morning, And I answered, and I knew what they were looking for. Someone who was a community person and would get into the community and in the area of education. I knew I had them then. So finally, after, I call it a grilling, after they interviewed me, gentleman that I loved, he and his wife dearly, said to me, well, young lady, you think you can do the job? And my response was, you'll never know unless you hire me.
Amen.
And that was the end of the story. But it's been a marvelous 30 years at that church. I pray daily, just even when I'm just sitting, that that God will send someone that will expand, And I knew I probably could have retired long before, but I was having so much, and it was fun, in the hardships too. Mm-hmm. I knew that I had brought them as far as I could. Mm-hmm. You're not going to have been one of those pastors that was just there every Sunday, And I know the love that they have for me because of the respect that I have for them. But I didn't want to just keep on going. I wanted to move out the way so that they could find someone who was younger. I have no problem with them getting another woman, but they've had a woman for 30 years. So if they would find a young man with a family, even if he didn't have a family, but a young man, so they could see, you know, the difference. You know, they've had a woman for 30 years, you know. So I knew that was when my time was. I had no problem. Yeah, it was hard giving up the ship, you know, but I tried to do it with grace, you know. And, you know, I know that, and I haven't been to honor the, what do you call it, the letter that you signed.
Oh, the covenant of closure?
The covenant of closure.
We'll know what we're getting afterward.
I said, this means that I'll never see my folks anymore. But no, I understand that, you know, and people will ask, when are you coming back? And I haven't been back, and I will honor that. I will honor that. That's not a problem. And, you know, and I have my own personal friends that I've had, you know. I don't ask them anything about Oxford. They don't tell me. I don't want to hear it, you know. And, you know, my sister still works. I don't ask her anything. I don't want to hear it, you know, because that's a way for me to move on. But those folks will always be in my heart. Always. You know, there are a lot of pastors that don't leave with that kind of, you know. And I can honestly say in 30 years, I've had some disagreements, but I've never had an argument with anyone in that church. Never. But I will call you in the office in a minute. Put on my principal's hat. and they know that. They know that. We have one gentleman at church that says, if I say, Kevin, can I see you for a minute after church in my office? The guy would say, you better ask her what she wants before she takes you in there. Yeah. But you know, I think I was fair with people. You know, I would give the shirt off my back to any of them. I would, you know, I've gone to the hospital 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning when they would get after me. When the need was there. I've gotten lost at the University of Penn a couple of times, walking through that great big, those dark areas, you know. But I knew I had to get to my folks, and I do attribute it to God taking care of me. You know, and I try to always be in tune. Not that I'm always, you know, because we hear our own drumbeat. But if God says you will, you can. It never occurs to me that I can't. You know, and I like other people. You know, you get stubborn. You're going to listen to your own way many times. But I really want to do the will of God, and it's scary sometimes because he or she will lead you down paths that you never ever thought. How did I get here? But you didn't get there on your own. That's my feeling. That's my belief.
I know when you left Oxford, you were clear on saying that it wasn't the end of your ministry. Where do you perceive God leading and calling you now?
Well, right now, you know, I've been given permission through our Presbytery to keep my Bible study going. And I call it Pastor Taylor's Bible Study. So there's no mistake. You know, when I had the Bible study in Oxford, we would have between 60 and 75 people every week. Half of them weren't even members of the church. Half of them were even other denominations. I have now between 25 and 30 that still are online, you know. And that's that teaching that I can't get out of me, you know. And I still prepare my work like I'm doing a sermon, you know, kind of thing. Because I want people to know what the scripture says, you know. They challenged me. I had a 6-week study on, I usually ask them at the end, what is it that you want me to do, us to do next, you know, and I'll prepare it. And if I don't know how, I will find out, you know. I will let you know that I can. Well, they wanted to know, get a clearer understanding of this war between Israel, Palestine, Hamas. I said, Lord, you know. And I, like many people, you read it and you take in what you want to take in. But this is people really wanted to know. So I started from the scriptures. I felt comfortable there, Then it went into questions, and then we would work together. And one of the things that the people are not afraid to ask questions. That's what I like about this Bible study. And the disadvantage that I have, I'm on the telephone because many of them, these are older folks, many of them don't have access to iPad and, computer and all that. But we make it work, And I have a keen sense of whose voice that I hear. So I'll say, is that you, Pat? That kind of thing. And they come on, and so I know that I will be doing some kind of teaching somewhere, if not in the Presbyterian church. God's not only in the Presbyterian church,
Strike that from the video.
Well, you know what I mean. Yeah. And there's a need. People are hungry for the word. People are hungry and thirsty for the word of God. And I don't pretend that I know it all. And many times they will ask me questions that I say, well, I don't know, but I'll find out, you see. I have people on from Baptist churches, other denominations, And I know I'll be doing some kind of teaching. I was in a nursing home the other day, seeing one of Bible study people, and they introduced me. The woman introduced me that I was visiting, and the first thing someone yelled out, "Can you have prayer with us?" Well, and people were holding hands and bowing their heads, And I had taken an inspirational devotional book to this person I was visiting, and the lady sitting next to her said, "Do you have another one that I can have?" So I promised that that was the other thing, I'm going to get my books up, but I had to be careful because many of them, my books are not the big ones, the big print. But, I'll be doing a Bible study somewhere. Mm-hmm. I'll be teaching somebody. But I don't think I want to go back into the school system, because of the way, when I taught school, all I had to say is, I'm going to give your mother a call. They would rather not. They would rather for me to keep them after school or keep them, from going to gym or something, But you can't do that today. And I'm afraid that if I went back into the school system, you all would be reading about me in the newspapers. Well, anyway, that's my journey. It's been, the book, I think I told you that I'm writing, at least I have the title to it, The Joy of an Incredible Journey. And it has been my life, I still drive. I still like to travel. I'm trying to get used to the feeling that, I don't have to do it today. I can do it tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And God gifted me with my sister coming back home, my youngest sister. We're complete opposites. We get up in the morning, we have our coffee and tea together. We're talking. I said, "Well, what are we doing today?" And she'll say, "Well, just what we're doing now." I said, "We're not doing anything." She says, "That's exactly what I mean." And that's exactly what she does. She is the writer in the family, keeping the family, the word I'm trying to use.
Like the history?
History is the word I'm trying to get. The family history together. Mm-hmm. She spends a lot of time on that, And she's written some things.
Do you have any reflections about how your life and world events have interacted in a way that would speak to folks that might be listening to your story?
I remember, my parents were from the South, and my mother would always send my sister, the one next to me, every year. We'd go to Summerton, South Carolina, to spend the summer with Grandma. Huge farm, and loved it. When I was 12 years old, something happened that turned me not against, but not wanting to go back down there. I did not understand. My grandmother, we would walk to town, which may be about half a mile or so. And she wanted to buy a hat. And she kept saying, I want this hat. I said, well, try it on, you know. And she said, darling, I can't try it on. So I said, what do you mean you can't try it on? She said, I'll tell you when I get home, we can try it on. And she bought the hat and brought it home. And that's when I really began to, first inclination, because we never talked about that at home. You know, you lived up north, you know. And that just did me in. I never wanted to go south again. It was 25 years later when I went south again, and that was to my uncle's funeral, you know. I think women today have a place in history that they've never had before. When I look at the people in Congress, some we will never know who they are, but sometimes I look at the C-SPAN, you know, there are women there. There are women doctors, you know, women attorneys. I look at my own two girls, you know. My youngest daughter, Mary Lou, she's 58, I think, now, 59. I told her that I didn't have money for her to go to college, you know, because I had sent the other two to school, and they went. One went to University of Pittsburgh, and the other went to University of Asheville. And she said, that's okay. She never asked me to this day if she could have stayed on the campus just for one night. But look what she's done, you know. She thought she wanted to go to medical school, but she decided that if she joined the service, that it would take, you know, all of her money, you know, to pay back. So she went to Temple University, and she majored in biology and minored in chemistry. I didn't know my daughter had it like that. And I see it today. She is not only a patent attorney at the top of her field. When I tell you the top of, she's got clients from all over the world. What's the other thing that she does? Oh, I can't remember. Pharmacist. She was a pharmacist. And that's how she worked her way through college. She's worked in almost every hospital here in Philadelphia, you know. But I'm very proud of her and what she does. I'll just tell you this. She's on her way to Nigeria. She mentors African students who come here. She's on the board of trustees at Drexel. She mentors them. And one of them is a doctor that has started a hospital there. And he wants to train the young women because, you know, they don't have to go to school after a certain age and they get married and all that kind of stuff. And she actually sponsors and pays for some of the teachers that are teachers to teach these kids, you know. So she's going to see the fruits of her labor when she goes in 2 weeks. Then I look at Julie, who's in health, you know, education. Extremely smart, just recently got a master's from Columbia. And Mary Lou went to Villanova and got a law degree there. But here are two young ladies, you know. And I get to meet others, you know, in their circle, you know. So women are beginning to stand up and be seen and not be intimidated. You know, I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah. And I certainly, even now, encourage, you know, our young female pastors, you know, just go. Just go. I've always been involved in the Presbytery. If you asked me to name the many committees that I've been on, I probably couldn't remember, you know. I remember chairing the Small Church Development Committee, when it was down at 22nd and Locust Street. Can't think of it. I've been on so many committees. I really just can't remember. I had to stop and think about that. But you were asking about the moving here.
Mm-hmm.
When they were they were putting out a questionnaire sheet, and I remember that, you know, of and it was getting very expensive to travel downtown, you know, to the Presbytery. I mean, it would cost anywhere $15 to $20 to park, you know, anywhere down there. The questionnaire was, you know, if I remember correctly, you know, we're considering moving, you know, it's been brought to our attention. Where do you think we might relocate? Do we take a vacant church and, you know, gut that out and rebuild from that? Do we start someplace brand new? Do we go to the city, stay in the city? Do we go to the suburbs, you know? And the committee met over to the church because I was invited, you know, to sit on the committee. And jokingly, I said to, who was the gentleman that retired? That was
Larry Davis?
Larry Davis. I jokingly said to Larry, well, all this land we have here, why don't you consider, you know, buying some of this land? I was just joking, you know. And somehow or other, you know, it got to be that, you know. And I'm very glad because this, I think this opened up more for the community to know who we are. When I first came to Oxford, almost at least 3 times a week, and this leading into this, I would walk in any of the streets. And if I thought I heard a door opening, I would kind of circle back around and I would introduce myself. And this was my first year. And I would say, I'd find out who they were. And I said, well, come visit us sometime. And I said, you do know where we are, Oxford. And they had us on every corner. How could you miss, you know, 3 acres of land, you know, and a beautiful looking church, you know. But they didn't know us, you know. So now with the Presbytery being here, now you have the voting here, you know, and I'm sure that people come in for whatever reason, you know. But it was a good move. It was a good move. I think the vote went down. They wanted something that was still accessible to the train, the streetcar and whatnot. Parking space, you know. So it was and it's been a good relationship between Oxford and the Presbytery. You know, I think it's been a good relationship for any number of reasons. You know, the community gave us a hard way to go when we first started. You know, that we were having a building. First they thought it was our building. You know, we were building something that we were going to be housing homeless people, and you know, and you had to catch yourself. You know, and my thing was, well, so what? You know, I mean, these are people that live right across the street from us. You know, and a couple of times, one of our neighbors would have people to sign petitions right under our window there, so we could hear them, kind of thing. And I remember meeting a lady in the post office one day, and she was so apologetic. She lived not too far from here. She says, you know, I didn't want to sign that paper. She said, but they just made me. They told me that, you know, this was going to turn into, you know, I mean, it was horrible, you know. But they see now that it was the best thing that could have taken place. And then the Presbytery is open to having people in, you know, that kind of thing when they can, you know. But, yeah. And I think the only for that year they began building, we couldn't have summer day camp. And the parents were upset, you know. There was nothing we could do because we didn't want anybody to get hurt, you know, kind of thing, you know. But this is the only presbytery that I've been involved in, so I can't compare this with other presbyteries, you know. But I think, and you know, in 30 years, I may have missed 4 presbytery meetings. There's a number of reasons why you go. You go because it's the business of the church, you have a stake in it, But you also go to see folks that you don't see, In fact, it used to be that there would be more people outside in the hallways than inside, It's probably still true today. But it's, our work is important. Our work is important. And I like the how we look at things that need to happen, that ought to happen, And I guess one of the highlights for me was being elected to be moderator in 2004. In fact, I'll just tell you this on camera. I had lunch last week with Virginia Sales and Jim Eby, and I meant to bring the picture because Jim was the one that was the moderator then, and we talked about that. But that was the year, in 2003, I had the first knee done, and I was in the hospital. I stayed in rehab for 2 weeks. I begged them to let me stay because I needed to rest. And I was determined that I was going to, be walking that January. And the men at Oxford would help me on the stage, on the pulpit, with my cane, or my walker, and then my crutches, my cane. But that was a wonderful experience. The only downs part that got to me is, when they would go to examine for ordination, it was like, and you could hear it, I've got mine. This is what I went through, So too bad, sad, but you have to go through the same thing, And I remember speaking to the Presbytery of how we disagree in an agreeable manner, kind of thing. But it was a learning experience, and I've worked with many people in the Presbytery, So.
You talked about how the culture of the Presbytery has changed a
Yes.
little bit. Do you see the role of the church as having changed in your time?
I remember that my father-in-law told a story, and this is going back like to the 40s, that when the Presbytery met in Baltimore for whatever reason, would have been a regional meeting, and it was time for dinner, and somebody went to say the prayer, and the man said, the pastor said, I will not say the blessing until that colored man and his son leave. And we talked about that in segregation. But the next year, he became the moderator.
Wow.
Oh yeah. My father-in-law took no tea for the fever, so to speak. I almost forgot your question about the culture change of the.
Yeah, well, this is perfect. It's either the changing culture or the change of the role of the church, either one. It's just the changes in the institution.
Yeah. It has changed. The church is, it used to be folks would just come to church, and then go home. I now see the churches prayerfully are getting more involved in community. I think this is what it's all about. The church is not the building. We can have church any place. It's here. That the church is. I think that there's still a lot more work to do in the church as far as community is concerned. We welcome people, but do we really welcome people? And that has nothing to do with the size of the church. Small church, large churches, I feel that the church can do more in the community, because that's where, my thing is that Jesus didn't stand over in a corner and say, here I am, you all, come on over here. He met people where their needs were. And I think that's what we need to work harder on, meeting people where their needs are. you know, and really meaning it, not just handing out or passing out stuff to say, you know, we're helping you. But how do we get people to know who Jesus Christ is other than giving them, you know, a handout, you know? And there's still a lot of people in the community, not just in this community, in other communities that, you know, they only see the church, you know, when it's suitable to them, you know. But how do we get people to be an integral part of the church, you know? I sometimes wish that some churches would take out, and I'm sure there are churches that do that, to take out the benches, you know, and have an all-purpose sanctuary kind of thing, where people would want to come, you know, because the stigma of what church is for them goes back a long ways, you know. And I've been in some churches that are doing it, you know, but there's a lot more work that can be done and should be done. And I'm hoping that the younger folks that are coming in will not be afraid to just stand up and say, you know, I guess some of us old folks have to die out before this happens, but not me. Yeah. Wow. I think it's the people that you meet on the journey has been one. To know, you know, I've always been brought up at the church, and the church has always been a place that I felt safe, a place that I felt that they welcomed me, you know, as a child, and then as a teenager. And I say this because I remember in the Methodist church, you're christened, not baptized, as the word goes out. I remember that. And as I reflect on my journey, all these things come to mind. I was 3 or 4 years old when my sister and I were baptized. And we had these little white dresses on with these little toilet paper bows on. And you know, as a kid, like your kid's age, you know something was happening, but you wasn't sure. You know, your parents were telling you what a big day this was and all that, but still. But what hit me, and I remember as if it happened yesterday, when the pastor poured water on my head, the congregation began to sing, "Jesus loves me, this I know." And it was almost like hearing angels. You know, it was a soft thing, you know, and then people got louder and louder. I remember that as if it just happened yesterday, you know. I remember also on that journey when I was 12 or 13 years old that I challenged my Sunday school teacher. I was just showing off then. I said to him, "Mr. Johnson," at the end of the class, I said, "I bet I can teach that lesson just like you." And he said to me, "You think you can, young?" Very kind man. He said, "You think you can, young lady?" I said, "Yeah." So he gave me the Sunday school book. He said, "Take this home and you're going to teach the lesson next week." What I was concerned about, not that I couldn't teach because I loved reading, would my peers laugh at me because I couldn't teach it the way he taught it. But just that experience opened up a whole new world for me, because then they began to ask me to help out in the little kids' Sunday school, to play the piano, you know, and just other things began to happen. I remember we used to have, on Sundays, you could come after church like 4 or 5 o'clock, teenagers, you know. I got involved with planning programs, not knowing what you're doing, but it was so much fun because everybody said, you know, Ethelyn can do it, kind of thing. And just doing it because I guess I could do it, but didn't know I could do it. You know what I'm saying? You know. So there's those little things along the way, you know. I've never left the church. I've never been one to, I think I would feel guilty. Even now, you know, you can take this out, but I missed Ash Wednesday service. Never missed it. Always been involved in it. But my daughters took me and my sister out for dinner. And when they told me that 2 or 3 weeks ago, I hadn't even thought about, because now I don't have to look at a calendar, Yeah, I felt a little guilty after I got home last night. So I had my own little Ash Wednesday service.
It's like we had ashes here if you needed them.
Yeah. But, so there are little things along the way that have helped me to put all this together. And if I saw the whole picture, it would kind of frighten me. Because I've done things prayerfully positively, in a positive way, that I've forgotten. That's just part of who you are. I don't know if that answered your question somewhat.
It answered a good question, so.
Okay, yeah. So I hope, I tell folks that when I get to heaven, I want to be a choir director. That's something I love doing also. And maybe you were asking, what now? Maybe I'll find a small church that doesn't have a musician, and I haven't touched the organ in so long, but who looking for some worship music on Sunday mornings. I'd be willing to do that, and could do it. No, it's been a wonderful experience. And you're talking about the listening. I just have to tell you this quick story. Children have always been a part of my life, and I remember going to bat for several children, who were in the court system, and there's one little boy, he's probably by my son's age now, in his late 50s. He came from a family of 17, and he had brothers and sisters in the same school with them, but you would never know they were related. The teachers, and my mother said never use the word hate, but the teachers really hated him because he always came to school, like he'd slept in his clothes, and he probably had, his hair was nice hair, but his hair was all over his head. And he could curse like a sailor. And I remember one day, and I always taught 4th grade, and the 3rd grade teacher had him. And that's when we used to go home for lunch from 12 to 1. And I was going upstairs with my 2 kids, Justin and Meredith, Julie and Michael. And I was going upstairs, and I kept seeing this little head just bobbing behind the door that you go out. So I opened the door real quick, and I said, "Why are you here?" I said, "Go home so you can get back in time." He said, "She ain't gonna feed me." I said, "Go home. She ain't gonna feed me." I said, "Well, you can come upstairs and have lunch with us." And Julie and Michael were mad with me because they had to share their lunch. I said, "But the first curse word that I hear coming out of your mouth, you're gonna be sorry you ever met me." And so he sat there. I made them share their lunch. They didn't like that at all. And he kept watching me while he was eating. He didn't know what was going to happen. The next year, I get this kid in 4th grade. The first day of school, he comes, and there were only 2 4th grade teachers in the classroom, in the school. The other 4th grade teacher had him, and when she saw him standing in line, she said, "Get out, get out, get out!" And he's standing there just shaking. So she sent for the principal. Mr. Bonham comes running upstairs, and he looks at me. He says, "Can you just hold on to him until we find a place for him?" Now there are only 2 4th grade teachers. That one 4th grade teacher put him in. So I said, "Mr. Bonham," I said, "he can stay with me." I said, "But the only time you will see him, if I send him downstairs to be a messenger, because I'm going to take care of him upstairs. If you don't want that, then you find a place for him." He sat in the back of the class. He never learned how to read or write, and he would hold a pencil like this, and when he would try to write something, he would be like stabbing the paper. And he would have this little humming going on. And I couldn't teach him with the other kids, and I would keep him in and teach him the little Dick and Jane series. And when he would get in a fight with a kid, I would tell the class, they would have to stop, because he was a bully. I would say, "Stop, everybody. And I would say to the kid that he wanted to fight, I said, if you don't beat him, I'm going to beat you.
Hmm.
You know, so that meant, you know, they would just come up to each other snorting, you know, like a wolf. But I had been teaching him how to read using the kinesthetic approach to writing. Maybe I'd give him 2 words. The next day he would, I don't remember one. Maybe I'd give him 3 words and he would remember 1 or 2 of those words. Finally that December, kids were working. I called him, Mike, come up, sit on this bench. I gave him this book. And I said, start reading. And he yelled at me. He said, you know I can't read. Why are you giving this book? I said, son, read. And he started, Fun with Dick and Jane. And when I looked up, the little book was just black with water, where he had started crying. And I said to him, why are you crying? He said, I can read. I said, whoever told you you couldn't read? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, but nobody ever taught me to read. And that was him coming to my house, ringing my doorbell at 8 or 9 o'clock on Saturday morning where I would give him breakfast, you know. And my brother was a policeman then. And one day they got a call at 52nd and Market, that big 5 and 10 cent store they called it then. And this kid had been caught stealing. And brother took him down to 55th and Pine. And he's writing him up. And Mike said to him, you can't arrest me. He says, what'd you say? He said, I said, you can't arrest me. He said, why? He said, because I'm going to tell your sister on you. And, you know, he knew my family. He knew my family. Going to court with him so that he could stay with his mother that he didn't like. Saw him years later. My mother and I had stopped at a corner place where they were selling vegetables and whatnot. It was cold one November, and never looked up in the person's face because it was freezing cold. And I remember I bought some vegetables, and this person said, thank you, Miss Taylor. He said, I didn't think you would ever remember me. And I looked up at him and I was shocked. And it was Michael. It was Michael. I have not seen him since, but I often wondered what happened to him. But those kind of kids that I listened to, those kind of kids prayerfully made a difference in the world. You know, there are no sad songs for me. You know, the loss of my husband. And by the way, I preached my husband's funeral. Yes. Prayed with him over the phone. About maybe 1,000 miles away.
Wow.
Just, you know, he was a Presbyterian pastor. You know, hated the Presbytery because he came out of Washington, D.C. And I think Nelson was the one who was the moderator. And they would send for, and there were only 3 African, maybe 2 at that time. My father-in-law's church and one other church. They would send to Princeton and Yale for white males to preach. And here he was, ready for call, and never called. That's how he went to go to, not to go. So I left a bitter taste in his mouth, bitter taste in his mouth. And I knew he always really wanted to be a doctor. And there were 5 of them, and the 2 girls were teachers, and the one was a physician, the other was an undertaker. And he was the youngest, and there was 14 years difference in that age. And I used to say to him, you know, I will always work. I know how to work. I know how to make a living. Leave the ministry and go into medicine, you know. And he was very smart, very smart. But he didn't want to disappoint his father. You know, we hear stories about that, you know. And so he was hanging on to that, you know, he's got to please his father, you know. And sad situation, but that was life. But I did get to love him for a while, 30 years.
Yeah.